Your Mind at Work, Under the Hood, Session 7, once more, dear friends, unto the breach. But let's just remind ourselves of where all this is going. You know, the big reveal at the end of June. What's this book that Pete's been rabbiting on about for the last 7 or 8 months? And when will we find out what it is? Well, before we get to that, the first 4 months of Your Mind at Work from this side of the equation was all about problems and decisions. So we talked about the mindfulness, the energy, consciously thinking about things, how you can't multitask because of all the distractions that you face, and what to do when you have an impasse and how to get through that with insights. And then really the second third of the course is really about how to stay cool under pressure. And that's when we get into drama and uncertainty and expectations. And the last 3 sessions are all about collaborating with others. So why do we feel that some people at work are enemies and some people are friends? And then what is the effect of fairness and status on our relationships, and how to deal with constant change? The upside is, of course, that despite all the nonsense that comes out of my mouth in the first Your Mind at Work session every month, good old Jane turns it into something much more palatable and practical, and she will do exactly the same next week as well. So we shall look forward to that. Now, of course, the big theme really throughout this whole program, Your Mind at Work, from my perspective, are these 2 responses that the brain, your brain, my brain, anyone's brain, we cannot get out of this. We are going to look at situations and scenarios and environments in one of 2 ways only. They are either going to generate toward responses, which are about survival, which include curiosity, happiness, and contentment, for primary rewards like eating food, earning money, handling money, sex, even a familiar smiling face, can all generate what we call these toward responses. And we like towards responses because they're all about rewards. But then on the flip side of the coin, we have these life-threatening responses, the away responses like anxiety, sadness, and fear, generated by primary threats like seeing a bear in the woods, getting hot, hungry, or thirsty, or even seeing an angry face in a photograph. So we don't like the threats, but more often than not, the natural response is to veer towards the threat as opposed towards the reward. Always, 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 please, ladies and gentlemen, bear that in mind when we talk about some of the theories in this section, because it's really about what's going on in my boss's brain, what's going on in my brain, what's going on in the team's collective brains. Some of the theory really does make you think about the dynamics of day-to-day working life and even outside of working life. So it's an interesting, I would hope, an interesting topic, even though occasionally Kelly slaps my wrist because we get a bit technical. Anyway, today's program looks amazingly like this. We're going to go through a scenario. Then we're going to talk about why the brain is a social animal. Then we're going to talk about mirrors in the brain. Then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of why do we suddenly decide that somebody's a friend or a foe, literally instantly. And then how we go with friends with benefits, how we go from foe to friend. We will revisit scenario 1, but we'll call it scenario 2, and it'll play out completely differently because at that point, the people involved in the scenario will have listened to this amazing peer group presentation and they'll realize that they did it all wrong in scenario 1. And then we'll have a summary about turning enemies into friends. So through every now and then throughout these sessions, we've introduced you to good old Rose. Do you remember Rose? She's that lady who works for the company that plans, prepares, and executes conferences on behalf of their clients. And good old Rose got promoted, I think, in my session way back in October, but she's faced a few challenges along the way, and today's no different. So, following her recent promotion, Rose has her first telephone conference call with her brand new team later today. Now, this team is a diverse team. They're not all in the same location. And it is a challenge because it's the first time that the team are getting together. Prior to her promotion, Rose was a colleague of Lisa and Colin. Hint, hint, you can see where we're going with this. And Rose has just hired Joanne. Joanne is the brand new member of the team. Rose thinks that in this first meeting, the the first order of business today should be to decide who is going to run the conference that the company has just won. So a bit of background information. The company that Rose works for has just won this huge opportunity. It's a really big conference, one of the biggest ones that they've ever been responsible for. And Rose has to decide which of those 3 team members is going to actually take responsibility for planning and running that conference. So it's 9 o'clock in the morning. The conference call is due to start. The first 2 members to arrive are Lisa and Colin, and they, of course, know each other extremely well. They've been colleagues for years, even though they don't reside in the same place. So there's a bit of chit chat and banter going on between Lisa and Colin. If you look at the boxes around the characters themselves, at various points throughout the slides, they'll be either red or green. If they are green, it means that those individuals are involved in the meeting. And if they have green words in the text marks, they will be talking at that time. If they're in a red box, it means they're probably in the meeting, but they're not actually talking. And if you're colorblind, please see me afterwards and I'll explain it all to you. The next person to arrive on the conference call is Rose. And the minute that Rose arrives, Lisa and Colin shut up. So all the little repartee that was going on suddenly stops and there's this really awkward silence. And Rose is thinking, this is a bit strange because we've been mates for years, but nothing's being said. Joanne joins the call and she's bubbly and excited because she's new to the organization and this is her first call. Hi, everyone, I'm Joanne. Okay, Rose says, down to business straight away. Let's get started. We really need to decide today, Lisa, Colin and Joanne, who's going to run this new conference. You've all heard about it. It's our biggest opportunity, hugely valuable for the organization. Who should run that conference? Colin, what do you think? You've been here a few years. What do you think should happen? Well, I don't think Lisa should do it because it's so big and complicated. She's probably not that detail oriented. So I really don't think she should do it. I really don't think Joanne should do it because basically she's new and she doesn't even know what we do. So there's only really one obvious candidate, should be me. All of a sudden, Joanne says, hang on a minute, you don't even know my background. You don't even know what I can do. I could do it. And then Lisa says, oh, that's all well and good, Colin, but you're useless with budgets. I can guarantee we'll overspend if you're responsible for planning something as big as this. But then Joanne pipes up and says, Lisa, don't attack Colin on my behalf. I can do it myself. Thank you very much. Everybody's really angry. We're only 10 minutes into the call. Rose has lost control completely. And before she knows it, it's descended into a complete and utter verbal brawl. The call has to be ended because Rose does not know what to do next. So what was supposed to be a call that would run for 30 minutes is actually closed down and ended after 12. What the heck went wrong? I'll come back and we'll ask that question again towards the end when we see the other scenario. But now I'll give you some of the insights into what happened in that call. So the brain is a social animal. So if you imagine for a second, you're a wolf and you're up there somewhere in the Arctic or somewhere up north anyway. And from being a little wolf cub or whatever they call them, you're out there in the wild. Everything you learn, everything you appreciate, everything you do, all your natural instincts are determined by the wild world. But if you're a young child in our environment down here and away from the wild, everything you're going to learn as you mature, as you grow, as you're educated, as you mature as an individual, you are going to learn from the social world. That is something that animals, as far as we know it, don't have. And the human brain is a social animal. And that's what's going to explain some of what we go through today. The social brain network allows you to understand and connect with others and to understand and control yourself. When that understanding and connection is missing, I'll tell you right now, the brain assumes the person that you're thinking about is an enemy. The need for safety, the toward response, the friendly response, manifests in a fundamental desire to feel related and connected to the people around you. When that's gone, you feel threatened. So a sense of Relatedness is what you get when you feel that you belong in a group, that you're one of the boys or girls, that you're part of a team, that you feel that the team is cohesive, that you're pulling together. And that feeling of relatedness is a primary reward for the brain. And it's really, really important for 90% of us in the workplace. An absence of the relatedness generates a primary threat, and that generates loneliness and unhappiness. So the key word from today's presentation, I'm giving it you right up front, is relatedness. Many of you will probably be familiar already with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a psychological model to determine how humans evolve and what's important as a basic need and what develops as we develop. And Maslow said at the very bottom of the pyramid is this thing called psychological needs, the need for air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction. They are the basics of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's only when you get to level 3 that love and belonging, like friendship, intimacy, family, and a sense of connection actually is important to humans. Well, I'm here today, guess what, to challenge good old Maslow, because some scientists now believe that social needs are in the category of primary threats and primary rewards as essential for survival as food and water. We need those connections as humans. So did Maslow get it wrong? Should love and belonging or primary rewards and social connection actually be at the base of the pyramid rather than in the middle of the pyramid? And would that at least help to explain, in the absence of those connections, why that conference call for Rose and her team went so badly wrong? But now we also have to understand what we call mirrors in the brain. And this is all due to a fabulous fella by the name of Giacomo Rizzolatti. And just looking at his picture, I can tell you, I think I really would buy a used car from him. But he really did come out with an interesting theory, which all revolve around these things called mirror neurons, those little things that fire in the prefrontal cortex. He says that when you see somebody do something intentional, as opposed to a random act, that similar neurons will fire in your brain as if you did it as well. And that makes a social connection between you and the other person. So mirror neurons are the brain's mechanisms for understanding other people's intent. In other words, when you understand their goals and their objectives and where they're coming from, as a result of feeling connected to them, you understand them a lot better. Now, these neurons, these mirror neurons, only light up if we see someone perform an action that we think is intent, has a specific intent behind it. So if someone picks up a glass, your brain does the same thing. If someone smiles at you, your natural inclination through the mirror neurons is to smile back. You share the emotion of the person in front of you, you make that connection, and in that moment, they're a friend, not a foe. But if people don't have the social cues to pay attention to, they simply cannot connect with other people's emotional state. And if you can't connect with the emotional state, you are going to treat them as an enemy. The brain cannot help but do anything else. Think about this, though, in the context of the workplace. Think about how tricky that is, even for a new person on their first day at work, because every single person they're introduced to is potentially an enemy. And they can't do anything about it because the brain is telling them, you've not met this person before. You've got nothing in common with them. There's no social connection between you. That's why onboarding a person on the very first day is so important. You have to make those connections. And that's why, by the way, and this stat is still true, 4% of people will decide to leave a new employer on their first day, because those connections weren't made. So if you want to collaborate well with others, you simply have to try and understand what kind of state others are in. And by the way, call me Mr. Biased with my design thinking hat on, but that is stage 1 of design thinking, empathy. Mirror neurons are the brain's way of knowing what other people are intending. And if you get it right, you will build those connections. But if you get it wrong, you're going to cause trouble. You can't help it. It's wired into your brain. So now, how do we decide if someone is a friend or a foe? By the way, why do people find it so hard to collaborate? Really, basically, deep down, even in the workplace, you could always argue, yeah, but, we're all part of Next Dimension. Why would we fight amongst ourselves? Why would there be artificial silos between this department and that department? Well, it's because the brain is still giving you these continual messages that until you work out what the connection is between sales and marketing, or marketing and sales and operations, they're going to treat each other like enemies. It's the natural state. So as an organization, we've got to figure out how to get those people connecting in a way that they understand. And they can do that through two things: shared experiences and shared goals. So let's have a look at what goes on in the brain. And it is all to do with the brain. The brain automatically classifies any situation into a possible reward or threat. We know that already. It does the same with people. You determine subconsciously whether you meet a person, whenever you meet a person you meet, you're telling yourself immediately off the bat, this person's a friend or this person's a foe. Interestingly, if you decide that someone is a friend, it generates a toward response. But if you decide that someone is a foe, it generates an away response. If it generates a toward response, it generates massive amounts of oxytocin. And those of you who probably know already that oxytocin is the love hormone. Yeah, baby. Sorry, I've been wanting to do that for ages in a peer group. Forget I said that. Our animal instincts naturally cause us to withdraw and treat others as foes. That is a fact, unless a situation arises that generates oxytocin. The way we generate oxytocin, if you're in a training course or if you're in a meeting like this, you do it through icebreakers. What do Kelly and Ryan do in a peer group that's remote like this? They go around the room and get everybody to introduce themselves. As soon as they get everybody to introduce themselves, we're starting to share information. We're starting to build connections. You can do this even if you're taking phone calls, for example, asking somebody's name, actively listening, asking questions, showing empathy, showing an interest, finding common ground, being genuine. All of these will generate the towards response that creates the oxytocin. So this is really important in helping to collaborate with people in and outside of the workplace. In the spirit of Family Feud, we asked 100 women, and it was 100 women, by the way, what is the number one thing out of all of those things on the chart there that generates the most happiness in life from your perspective? Is it money? Is it health? Is it sex? Is it marriage? Is it having kids? Is it hanging out with friends? And the number one answer was hanging out with friends. The one thing that makes people really happy is the quality and quantity of their social connections. And I'll say that again, the quality and quantity of their social connections. Dopamine, remember the neurotransmitter of curiosity, of interest, plus a good, healthy helping of oxytocin equals happiness. And if people are happy, they'll collaborate. They'll treat more people like friends as opposed to enemies. Friends and benefits. Loneliness generates a threat response to the human brain, which is actually equally as strong as any pain that you feel, the fact that you might be dying of thirst or hunger, or the fact that you're really, really afraid of something. The greater levels of social support that people have, the less sensitive they are to rejection, criticism, verbal attacks, and emotional outbursts. And as you look at that slide for a second, doesn't this just explain why so many people started to have mental health issues during the pandemic, when we took away all the ability, other than over video calls, to actually interact in person with people? And the lower the level of social support, those individuals who lived alone, who weren't able to get out and talk to friends, who weren't able to get out and do activities and build relationships and make those social connections, it became a very scary environment, which led to a lot of mental health issues, some of which are still continuing now, by the way. Laurie, did you want to say something?
I have a question. When you say less sensitive, do you mean that they experience those more, or do you mean that they react more if others do that?
What I'm saying is when people have greater levels of social support and they are, for example, criticized, they will be less emotionally upset than those people who have no one.
Yeah, so that's what my question was. So if they experience those things in other people, they're less tolerant of it, or it impacts them more.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
So when you sense that someone is a foe, here is the key to why there are so many arguments in the workplace. You don't feel empathy for him or her, and you're not even going to try to feel empathy for him or her. Less empathy means less oxytocin. You inhibit yourself from considering their ideas, even if you know deep down that they're right. You don't want to know because you have no empathy, because this person is an enemy. This is all going on naturally. You can't stop this. You are more likely to misread their intent, and you are more likely to get easily upset because you cannot perceive this person as being anything other than an enemy. Whether it's your boss, whether it's somebody who reports to you, whether it's a peer, it doesn't matter. The job title is irrelevant. Once you've perceived that this person is the enemy, you are going to treat them like this. So you think about Rose's first conference call meeting as the new boss. Everyone defaulted into considering everyone else as a foe because no connections were built. And Rose, rightly or wrongly, jumped straight into a very pragmatic, transactional, we just need to figure out who's going to run this conference. But bear in mind, it was the first time that team were getting together. And as Chris knows, I talk all the time about teams that come together, you know, they form, they storm, they norm, and they perform. So they have to come together and they have to figure out in storming how they're going to work together, the modus operandi, who can do what, you know, how to play to each other's strengths. And it's only when they norm and they have those guidelines that they can perform. Well, none of that happened in our first scenario because it wasn't allowed to happen. And that's why the call went so badly wrong.
Sorry, Pete, I saw Stan had his hand up.
Oh, sorry. Go on, Stan.
This is fascinating, really interesting stuff. Couple of questions. I've observed that certain people have, I guess, an identity or a self-image where plain speaking is their brand, and they don't like to be diplomatic. You know, it's not like it's not in their nature, or they resist the temptation to try to sugarcoat things or do others. That's one. And then the other is there are certain people who do thrive on conflict and who seek it. So how do you consider those two facets of this discussion?
Well, I think I'm actually coming on to it in a second, but the point is you look for the common ground. You don't necessarily have to like somebody to work well with them, and you can treat them as a friend even if you don't like them, if you find the common ground. So, for example, I can actually talk about an example from Next Dimension. 5 years ago, what we now call operations was divided into two very discrete camps. One was called managed services, which included the service desk that Chris is responsible for, amongst other things. And the other one was called professional services, which is our projects team who design and deploy the systems which the managed services team end up supporting and maintaining. Now, those two teams, for all sorts of different reasons, were fighting like cat and dog. They were fighting like cat and dog because they felt that they were in competition with each other, but there was no attempt made to connect them and show them that the common enemy was actually outside of the organization. It was actually the competition itself. Now, when we actually changed the structure of the team and made it one big team called operations, those silos disappeared, and the level of collaboration that goes on a daily basis, because Chris and I sit in on meetings every day where we live and breathe this. It's like black and white, chalk and cheese, as I would say. It's just a completely different ball game. But the way that we did it was to find the common ground between the two old teams and tell them you're all in this together. And that's the way you do it. It's not a question of this person is just a plain talker. I don't like that. I don't appreciate the way that he or she talks. That does not prevent you from making them a friend in the sense of being able to collaborate with them. You may never like them, but you can still collaborate with them if you can find the common ground. So just give me a few seconds and a few more slides, and hopefully I'll be able to illustrate that for you. Happily, ladies and gentlemen, it's not as difficult as you might think. So what do I mean when I talk about finding the common ground? It doesn't have to be earth-shattering. You might meet somebody at the coffee machine and just talk about the weather. The minute you talk about the weather, that's something that you're both experiencing. Oh, look, it's really overcast in Windsor today. Chris, what's the weather like in London? Oh, it's even worse than that, Pete. We got rain at the moment. It's horrible and there's a terrible wind. But now we're talking about something we've got in common, something we can both relate to. You could say exactly the same thing about traffic jam. Hey, Pete, what was your commute like this morning? Well, for me, I'm in Windsor today, so it was only 15 minutes. It wasn't like I was battling the traffic in Markham. How about you, Chris? Because Chris was driving from Chatham to London. Oh, not too bad. I made it in just over an hour today. Cool. So now we've still got something in common, but we're not necessarily talking about work. Even something as a handshake when you meet someone, if you both feel it's a warm handshake, that will help you to know, hey, we've got something in common here. Even something as simple as exchanging business cards and names. You've just given each other something. Therefore, you have something in common. And so doing simple things like this will absolutely generate oxytocin. And that's what it's all about. That's what we've got to try and do. But how many of us, even when I was doing the research for this particular program that I'm running with Jane, this has been a complete eye-opener for me. I wish I'd have known this stuff like 30 years ago when I was first coming into the workplace. So many possible conflicts and unfortunate situations could have either been avoided or the level of collaboration could have been so much higher, so much quicker. Why don't they teach you this stuff in school? I mean, to me, this is fundamental. This is about how humans relate to each other. And what do we do at work? We relate to each other, either because we think they're a foe or because we think they're a friend. So think about shared experiences. How can we generate shared experiences that take this person over there and this person over there who currently aren't digging each other and see each other as enemies into something meaningful? Hey, Jane, hey, Kelly, ask me why that little island there in green is the most socially connected island in the world.
Pete, why is that little island in green the most socially connected island in the world?
I'm very thankful that you spontaneously asked that question. And the answer is because British people can't help but talk about the weather. Every time we meet somebody new, we automatically default into weather mode. And what are we doing? We're sharing experiences. So you could say, some people might deny this, Chris might be one of them, English people must be amongst the friendliest people in the world because they're always treating people like friends because we always want to talk about the weather. I'll let you decide whether that's true or not. Other things like you're in dispute, you see somebody as an enemy, but you've both got to figure out how to partition up a budget. Now, the partition and the negotiation is going to be interesting, but you become friends when you realize that you're only got a small part of the budget and other people are going to take from that budget as well. So you've got something in common. Shared goals are actually more powerful than shared experiences. So while shared experiences make a difference, shared goals are really the driving force of relatedness. Think about that when you are putting together a team that you feel may not appreciate each other. They may be subliminally treating each other like enemies as opposed to friends. Give them something common, like a common goal to work on. And 99 times out of 100, they will start to naturally move away from the foe and move towards the friend because they're in it together. It's the driving force of relatedness. So that's why, for example, in the workplace, we assign buddies. Very often you have a new employee and you'll say, okay, we're going to teach you this on your first day and this in your first week. And we'll let you know about this, that, and the other in your first month. But we'll assign somebody in the workplace to keep an eye on them, to be their buddy, to be their friend, to help them through the hurdles of the first few months of employment. That's why coaching and that's why mentoring is so popular and so effective in the workplace, because coaches and mentors will find the common ground and develop the common goals that drive the friendship as opposed to the enemy. So now let's go through scenario 1 again. Let's call it scenario 2, but let's see what happens now that Rose appreciates the value of the social connection. So, following her recent promotion, Rose has her first telephone conference call with her new team later today. And Lisa and Colin have been colleagues with her for years. Rose has just hired Joanne. Rose knows how important this first meeting is, not just for herself as the new boss, but also for Joanne as the new team member. So Rose decides this time, because it's the first call, we're going to go informal. We're not going to be stiff and starchy. Rose also decides not to worry too much today about who's going to run that new conference, important as it is, because we need to get the team working together, relating to each other. So Lisa and Colin join the conference call first, and just as in the first scenario, lots of repartee and blah, 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 blah. Rose joins the call, but in the same as in the first scenario, Lisa and Colin suddenly shut up. We realize, of course, that the reason for this is that Rose is now, in their eyes, no longer one of them. She's the boss, which she is, because she's just been promoted. So she makes a joke. Are you two plotting against me again? Suggesting that that was something they used to do anyway when they were all colleagues together. And it breaks the ice. So now we're having a giggle and a laugh and ha, 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 ha. Yeah, maybe we are. Maybe we are. Then Joanne joins the call. So Rose says, here she is setting the context now. Look, let's just get to know each other today. So Lisa says, why don't we just introduce ourselves and talk about some of the previous conferences we've worked on? Because we've all got experience. What is she doing? She's looking for the common ground, something that they've all got in common together. So during introductions, Lisa and Joanne discover that not only have they worked on conferences together, but they have children the same age. Not only that, but they discover that they have the same degree. And Lisa now starts to classify Joanne like herself. In other words, she's not a foe, she's a friend. So Rose then says, look, guys, you know Lisa and Colin, and I think I explained to you, Joanne, I'm new to managing people. What would you like from me? And so the team starts to generate ideas, ideation, brainstorming, spitballing, all sorts of ideas start to pour out. This is the storming part of the forming, storming, norming, and performing. And a few key themes emerge. The group wants open communication, they want trust, they want respect, and they want to have fun. Yeah, baby, this is how we're going to generate all this oxytocin. Colin then spontaneously, just like Kelly did when I asked her that question, pipes up and says, you know what, maybe Lisa should probably run the new conference because I did the last one. And Lisa says, hey, you know what, why don't we do it together, Joanne, because that can be part almost of your onboarding. We can get you up to speed faster. All of a sudden, it's a complete love fest. The team are starting to gel. Everybody's getting on. The common ground's been found. It's a perfect call. It's run for 30 minutes, not 12, and had to be shut down. What the heck went right? It's all around the dopamine and the oxytocin is the answer. So how do we turn friends? And so how do we turn enemies into friends? Social connections, I would argue now, are a primary need, as important as food and water. We know one another directly by experiencing other people's states ourselves. That is empathy. Without empathy, you have nothing. Safe connections with others are vital for health and for healthy collaboration. People are classed as friend or foe very quickly, with foe as the natural default. That's the bit that blew my mind. I actually assumed it would be the other way around, but it's not. So if there's an absence of positive cues, you are going to be subliminally or even consciously telling yourself that person is an enemy, and therefore the threat response is generated. Therefore, it is hard work, and you need to work hard at creating connections to create good collaboration. Think about that as a responsibility for somebody with direct reports. It doesn't matter how big your team is. Fancy running a team of 50 people, diverse across the world. How difficult it is to try and create that good collaboration through all the different connections, through all the different cultures potentially that you might be working with. But anytime you meet someone new, make the effort to connect on a human level as early as possible to try and reduce the threat response, and create shared goals with people you feel you might be in conflict with to help with the oxytocin and the dopamine. Create opportunities for shared experiences to try and turn people away from the foe mode into the friend mode. So, as ever, I've tried to leave a little bit of time for a little bit of comment and questions and discussion. But I will say, of course, as I said at the start, Jane, you missed this bit. I really built you up because I said, despite all the nonsense that comes out of my mouth in part one of your mouth, your mind at work, you always translate it into something meaningful and practical. And you'll do exactly the same next week when you talk about team building and teamwork at work.